Good
And
evening,
we
everybody.
sincerely hope that you've had a good Sunday afternoon.
Yes, I am Lynx, and I hope you are having a wonderful Sunday and that you are enjoying yourself and are ready to sit down with a few stories. And
Mm-hmm.
today we will talk about giants, and in particular the giants of Britain.
Yes, that's our theme today. Hello, it's Katrina here. Welcome, everyone. Yep, and we're live on YouTube as well. Good. For a second, I
Hmm.
thought that wasn't running there.
Yes, we
There
are
we go.
up on both platforms, so that's good. Ah, hey Tosia Michelle, good to see you. And Damdami,
Hello.
welcome to the show tonight. We will just give people a few
Yeah.
minutes to come in before we start our stories.
I noticed we got a couple of new followers.
Yeah,
A humble traveller, 1690 Sparky. Hello. Hello to you.
welcome.
Got a few people
So,
in.
yeah,
Yes. We've got some people on YouTube as well. Let me see if I can type the link into the Telegram chat. You might hear me typing.
the audio is really low.
Audio's really low.
Yeah,
We could turn us up a bit.
okay. Yeah, uh, increase the gain a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Caspian Spots. Good to see you here. Hope you're having a wonderful evening. Okay, we are turning up the levels now, so hopefully it will be better and you can hear us better. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I've turned up my volume a bit.
Tasia, yeah, Tasia Michelle is saying that she turned up her headphones and it's better, so
Okay.
it
Yep.
might
That
be
that might help.
it usually does. I
Yeah.
have been very close to start complaining about the sound or no sound on streams, and then
Mm-hmm.
getting the bright idea of actually checking my own sound levels
Yes.
before complaining to the host. And it's usually my own fault that I have turned down the volume for something else. So,
Yeah. Sometimes it can be difficult to tell
yeah.
what's going on with audio.
Yeah, in particular, I have a problem remembering if I have turned off the sound on something.
Oh yes.
And
Sometimes you just don't notice, do you?
yeah, good evening, Burika, and thank you for noticing the sound difference. I am quite pleased with my new microphone, and it was definitely worth the money. So, yes, Lone Wanderer, I have a new microphone. So, the feedback so far is that I am much clearer and all of that. So, hopefully, you can actually
It's
hear me
good.
now. And as a bonus, I don't have to sit with my computer on my lap and shouting into it. So,
Yeah, that's always better.
oh, yeah. Oh, offensive username. You're making me blush.
What's offensive username up to?
Ah,
Got a crush on things.
I don't feel I don't feel comfortable in reading that out loud. So,
Oh dear,
but
we got
I,
fans.
yeah.
We got those sort
Uh,
of fans now. Or Lynx does. I don't think my voice is very much. It's nothing. It's just bog standard English. It's not quite northern. It's not quite southern. You know.
uh, it's a bit hard for me to say because I don't know enough of the different dialects in
Mm.
England. So, uh,
Next fairy tale should focus
okay.
on simps and other goblins. I don't know. They feature much. I don't know if particularly simps feature much. Simps, are they
Uh,
historical? Next episode.
no, I haven't read anything about Sims, but I have read several stories where there's a princess that you can uh, win if you
Yeah.
can make her do something, and you get half the kingdom. So I think that's the closest. But in Norway, we do have a story that's called. Uh, oh, I don't remember the exact name, but it's basically the man who is loved by many women will never lack for anything. So that there is some truth to that. It does pay off to be loved by many women, it seems.
Oh, there we are.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um. Apologies if I have trouble muting and unmuting tonight. There's a weird situation on OBS where I cannot actually see my mute button, but it still works. So you just click on nothing. But I do seem to be able to mute and unmute.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
that's a bit awkward,
It's an
but
invisible mute button. Mute roulette.
uh,
Well,
disappearing and reappearing button, maybe.
mm,
Hopefully, it
yes.
will reappear one day.
I think we've I think we've had time for people to get in. Ah, little Pepe with
Hmm.
a rose. That's a cute sticker.
Yeah.
So yeah, today we have two interrelated stories that are very much woven into the foundational mythology of Britain, and another Cornish one, which does bear some similarity to a tale from Norway that we've told before, in a particular aspect. And the first tale we have is Brutus of Troy. Now that was written down by Geoffrey of Monmouth, of whom you might have heard before, because he is quite well known. He's knocking around a lot in terms of histories of prior to the medieval ages, the dark ages. And he wrote the Historia Regum Britanniae, so the history of the kings of Britain. And he wrote that in about 1136. And that work is, of course, known for lots of Arthurian legends. And then in 1129, he's recorded as maybe witnessing a charter. And Monmouth is probably referring to his birthplace, which would be in Wales. People have generally assumed he was Welsh, but he doesn't appear to have been. There's no real evidence that he was either Welsh or, sort of Anglo-Norman of descent, and he might have come from the same French-speaking elite of like the Welsh border country. And he was a Christian. They think he might have spent some time in Monmouth Priory, but not much in Wales. And he claims to have written these accounts in the Historia Regum Britanniae, based off a book that was given to him by the canon of St George's College, Oxford. And he says it's in the ancient British language and told in an orderly fashion the deeds of all the kings of Britain. Um, so, yeah, that was maybe given to by Walter, Archdeacon of Oxford. And modern historians tend to say that this book that he claims to have and have translated into Latin was very much made up. And there's a few critics of him in his own time. William Newborough was a guy who criticised him in his own time in 1190. There was another guy called Giraldus Cambrensis, who I think, from what I gathered of him, was claiming that his book was some kind of evil or something. But it was widely disseminated throughout medieval Western Europe. There's like 186 manuscripts listed as of like 1929. It's like a real jumble of things, this whole manuscript. Folklore, chronicles, king lists, dynastic tables, oral tales even, bardic praise, and there's a lot of that which is quite garbled and corrupted, and he has exercised considerable editorial control over that. Some people have said he has massaged the facts to try and create a single grand narrative. But again, I feel like modern historians are some of the worst for single grand narrative creating, aka history as progression. So we can probably forgive them for that. And much of the information has basically been derived from two sources: the orally transmitted heroic tales of two tribes called the Catavalani and the Trinovantes, who are basically pre-Roman tribes inhabiting central southeastern Britain at the very end of the Iron Age, and the king lists of the Roman dynasties who ruled territories in western Britain. So that's just a bit about the manuscript that it did come from. And it's a very interesting manuscript, if quite long-winded, so we'll probably be posting links to it on the channel, because it's a very interesting read. And it's got much more stories than just Brutus of Troy in it, but I did have to do some abridging to get across really the central points, because he has a little bit of a habit of going off on mildly irrelevant tangents, does Geoffrey. So I'm reading here from my own summarised version of Brutus of Troy, where I took all of the main points from. So, there was once a great Trojan prince called Aeneas of the royal house of Troy, which had two branches, the oldest of those of the house of Dardinia, and the second the house of Troy, which became the most powerful and the most famous. Aeneas's father, Anixius, was of the city of Dardinia, and his mother was Aphrodite, making him a powerful demigod. And his grandson, Tros, eventually lent his name to the city of Troy. When Troy fell, Aeneas fought heroically, and he was saved from death by the gods more than once. But eventually, he was forced to escape, carrying his aged father, Anchises, on his back. He led the Trojan survivors into exile. After a long time of wandering, they moved to Italy, where they settled and were the progenitors of the great Roman Empire. Aeneas had a son called Ascanius, who in turn had a son. Ascanius asked a sorcerer what his son would be, what would he do, what did the future hold? The sorcerer said, "Your son will be very well loved, a great man of many achievements, and he will rise to the highest honour. But I must warn you, his birth will be the cause of both your deaths." Ascanius couldn't stand the thought, and he killed the sorcerer. As predicted, Ascanius' wife died, giving birth to Brutus. Brutus grew up into a strong young man, with never any indication that he was going to kill his father. However, one day whilst out hunting in the forest, tragedy struck again. As predicted, Brutus, instead of hitting his intended quarry, as the beaters drove out the deer, he accidentally shot his father. His relatives were incensed, and Brutus was grief-stricken. He was exiled at just 15 years of age. He went into exile in certain parts of Greece, and there he discovered the descendants of Helenus, Priam's son, who were held captive in the power of Pandrasus, the king of the Greeks. After the fall of Troy, Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles, had dragged this man Helenus off with him in chains, and a number of other Trojans too. He had ordered them to be kept in slavery, so that he might take vengeance on them for the death of his father, Achilles. Realizing they were his ancestors, Brutus stayed with them, and soon his wisdom, military skill, and valiant nature was very apparent to them. They flocked to the hills, emboldened to flee their captivity, and begged Brutus to be their leader. Their descendant returned to rule. Brutus eventually agreed, and, allying with a local half-Trojan prince, Assaracus, whose fully Greek brother had turned the Greek king against him, and tried to deny him of his rightful inheritance of 3 castles. These castles they fortified. Brutus decided to give King Pandrasus fair warning, a letter requesting that the Trojans be allowed to live free and at peace in the hills. However, Pandrasus ignored this olive branch. With the king's men out hunting for them, they attacked, killing many Greeks in the first wave. After much fighting between the two, Brutus came up with a plan to storm Pandrasus' castle at night, convincing one of Pandrasus' own men, his brother Anacletus, to deceive him through threat of violence. The Trojans stormed Pandrasus' camp, with Brutus himself taking the king hostage. They threatened to take his life, indeed to take it slowly, and painfully, if he did not free the Trojans. King Pandrasus spoke thus: "Since the gods are hostile to me and have delivered me and my brother Anacletus into your hands, I must obey your command, for if you meet with a refusal we shall both lose our lives. I consider that there is nothing better or more enjoyable than life itself. It is not, therefore, to be wondered at if I am willing to purchase life with my material possessions." He even promised to give Brutus his daughter in marriage, which he did not mind at all, seeing as Brutus was an accomplished young man. Brutus was given ships and all kinds of grain, gold and silver for his men, and Ignoge, Pandrasus' daughter, who wept and wept on the voyage away from her relations, but Brutus was kind, and made every effort to console her. After 2 days and 1 night, they touched at a land called Laodicea, which had remained uninhabited since it was laid waste by a piratical attack in ancient times. There they hunted. They came to a deserted city, and found a temple of Diana. In the city there was a statue of the goddess which gave answers if by chance it was questioned by anyone. Brutus went, with 12 men, to perform a sacrifice to Diana, Jupiter, and Mercury, and poured libations to all. Brutus stood before the altar of the goddess, holding in his right hand a vessel full of sacrificial wine mixed with the blood of a white hind, and with his face upturned towards the statued godhead, he broke the silence with these words: "O powerful goddess, terror of the forest glades, yet hope of the wild woodlands, you who have the power to go into orbit through the airy heavens and the halls of hell, pronounce a judgment which concerns the earth. Tell me which lands you wish us to inhabit. Tell me of a safe dwelling place where I am to worship you down the ages, and where to the chanting of maidens I shall dedicate temples to you." This he said 9 times. 4 times he proceeded round the altar, pouring the wine which he held upon the sacrificial hearth. Then he lay down upon the skin of a hind which he had stretched before the altar. Having sought slumber, he at length fell asleep. It was then about the third hour of the night, when mortal beings succumb to the sweetest rest. It seemed to him that the goddess stood before him and spoke these words to him: Brutus, beyond the setting of the sun, past the realms of Gaul, there lies an island in the sea, once occupied by giants. It is now empty and ready for your folk. Down the years this will prove an abode suited to you and to your people, and for your descendants it will be a second Troy. A race of kings will be born there from your stock, and the round circle of the whole earth will be subject to them. Brutus and his men sailed the world looking for an island and found many other places, engaging in more great battles, suffering pirate attacks, and hard times without food or water, but eventually acquiring many riches. Eventually they came to the island that at that time was called Albion, and it was very beautiful, with many trees, rivers which teemed with fish, and all the Trojans wished to live there, but it also had giants, huge and ugly creatures. The Trojans soon drove these into the hills and caves with their weapons and their skill, and in time the island began to look as if it had always been this way. Brutus named it Britain, after himself, and so the people Britons, and the language British. Corinius, one of Brutus's best men, called his part Cornwall. There were a lot of giants in Cornwall, but that bothered Corinius not one bit. He loved to wrestle with them. Among the others there was a particularly repulsive one, called Gog Magog, who was 12 feet tall. He was so strong that, once he had given it a shake, he could tear up an oak tree as though it were a hazel wand. Once when Brutus was celebrating a day dedicated to the gods in the port where he had landed, this creature, along with 20 other giants, attacked him and killed a great number of the Britons. However, the Britons finally gathered together from round and about and overcame the giants and slew them all, except one, Gog Magog. Brutus ordered that he alone should be kept alive, for he wanted to see a wrestling match between this giant and Corinius. Corinius was of course delighted. He girded himself up, threw off his armour, and challenged Gog Magog to a wrestling match. The contest began. Corinius moved in. So did the giant. Each of them caught the other in a hold by twining his arms around him, and the air vibrated with their panting breath. Gog Magog gripped Corinius with all his might and broke 3 of his ribs, 2 on the right side and 1 on the left. Corinius then summoned all his strength, for he was infuriated by what had happened. He heaved Gog Magog up onto his shoulders, and running as fast as he could under the weight, he hurried off to the nearby coast. He clambered up to the top of the mighty cliff, shook himself free of this deadly monster whom he was carrying on his shoulders, and hurled him far out to sea. The giant fell onto a sharp reef of rocks, where he was dashed into 1,000 fragments, and stained the waters with his blood. The place took its name from the fact that the giant was hurled down there, and it is still called Gog Magog's Leap to this day. And that is why there are no giants in Britain. So yeah, that's my summary of the Brutus of Troy myth, and it is a long one. I shall post the whole link to the whole Historia Regum Britanniae for anyone who's interested in the channel later.
Mm-hmm.
And
It certainly was an interesting story.
it certainly is, especially because of this premise that Britain has been founded by refugees from Troy, or, well, people who fled Troy after it fell. And they've founded the Romans, and they've founded Britain also. And I think, although we are meant to be looking at giants today, that is worth definitely a look at. Like, it doesn't really fit in with what we think happened today. I mean, the current hypothesis for the movement of people is the Kurgan hypothesis from a Lithuanian, I think, woman called Maria Kimbutas. And everybody basically came out from the Pontic Steppe and the Black Sea and went off in various directions. Some of them went to the west, and some of them went in the Mediterranean, and some of them went, I think, into India as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and basically, just a long story short of it, it doesn't actually think, it doesn't line up with what we think happened in terms of the movement of people. But there are people who are saying that it could have, any degree of sort of truth to it. One that I found was Miles Russell of the University of Bournemouth, who, from looking at Geoffrey of Monmouth's account, says that Brutus might actually be of the Trinovanti tribe, near where London is, and Corinius founds the Catabalani, and these two tribes are claiming descent from Rome and Troy. He basically reckons that Geoffrey could have been accurately recording 1st century AD history, just based on comparing three accounts of basically the same battle that Geoffrey's fought with different battles. He
Mm-hmm.
got a little bit mixed up sometimes, I think, with some of his sources, but it has been useful there because they've been able to do this comparison of names.
Yeah.
And certainly,
Uh,
if you watch Asher Logos and his video on Hellenic Greece, and he he's basically looked at scholarship which reckons the Trojan War was real and set in motion by the Phoenicians, and it was very much a big battle, a big clash at deciding who's going to rule basically the world. And the fall of Troy made it possible for Greece to even expand, and ancient historians say it did provide the rootstock for both Rome and Britain. Virgil is attesting to yes. Aeneas is reported to have gone to Italy. Brutus is said to have founded New Troy. And there are quite a few accounts. And what we do find interesting is that this has been mentioned in terms of correspondence between Britons and Romans as well. They have mentioned it. King Cassibelan has mentioned it to Caesar. He's appealed to Caesar and said the same vein of nobility flows from Aeneas in Britain to Romans. So the same vein of nobility flows in both, and that's why the Britons find it particularly insulting to be enslaved by the Romans or have that prospect.
mm-hmm.
So definitely it is maybe something there, even in the case of a couple of tribes, maybe having been
Yeah.
descended from Troy.
Yeah. One of the things Ashologos takes up in his series is how different waves of movements basically crash into one another over the years, uh, of peoples who were really of the same stock in many ways,
Mm.
but came at different times and then ended up warring against each other or butting heads. So that goes on in most of Europe. Uh, and when it comes to Troy itself, they have actually found Troy, so it's not really a myth anymore. Um, Not in the sense that it never happened, because we know it did happen, but maybe the stories have been embellished somewhat,
Mm,
but it's certainly not anything that's just
yeah.
the fancy of Homer's imagination or anything.
No, definitely not, because it's a bit weird to just make up something because really mundane. There's a whole battle and a whole city, you know?
Hmm.
Why would you just make up a city?
Yeah,
But yeah.
and in particular in that specific way. You know, it's not in a land far, far away or anything, but it's quite specific with who they were fighting and
Mm,
all of that. So it's not really that random anymore.
yeah. Yeah, I do think that's quite true. But there is also like the weird thing of Troy towns, which are just these labyrinth patterns all over Britain. And Survive the Drive's got a good video on them. We don't actually really know where or when they originated, to be honest. There's one basically landscaped onto a hill in Glastonbury, and they're in Cornwall too. So there's lots of connections to Troy all over Europe,
Yeah,
really. And then they are on
yeah.
ancient Greek coins, these things.
I
Yeah.
back when I was looking into basically all kinds of stuff, I came across one guy who has theorized that the um, the Odyssey takes place along the coast of Norway, of northern Norway, to be specific, because he has taken the descriptions in the story and compared it to the Norwegian coast. And according to him, it's very similar. I haven't really checked into it myself, but I do remember coming across that quite a few years ago on Red Ice, I think it was. So they seem to be somewhat connected to basically everyone,
Yeah.
and it's definitely uh, a very important moment in European history. So,
Indeed.
mhm,
In terms the let's move on to giants because I know that's what everyone came here for.
yeah,
The giant in this one, um, Gog Magog, people may actually recognize that name from Ezekiel 38, where Gog is an individual and Magog is his land, or Genesis 10, where Magog is a man but no Gog is mentioned. And there's it goes from Magog into Gog and Magog, which is the form they appear in the Christian New Testament's book of Revelation. And they're
mhm,
both tribes of people. And Goth and Magothi are the kings of the unclean nations driven beyond a mountain pass by Alexander in the Alexander romances about Alexander the Great. And Muslims had these guys too. They call them Yajuj and Majuj. And Satan apparently gets Gog and Magog to help him in the final battle. Weirdly enough, nobody in the Middle East would consider Gog and Magog to be giants. They consider them to be short, hairy peoples.
from
Yeah.
one thing to the other, but both being hairy.
Yep.
So at least that's one thing connecting them,
This is
besides
true.
the name.
Hairy. But yeah, like there's been there's been various insinuations that people might have regarded the Vikings as Gog and Magog, and they were seen they were seen by many as like violent raiders, and you know, their conquest of other territories was maybe in response to need in their own homeland or retaliation due to
Yeah,
Christian encroachment upon tribal lands.
yeah, that is one major uh, hypothesis of what the Vikings were actually doing.
Mm.
Um, but
Well, they were known to be a bit more, perhaps a bit more merciful than people think, but we can get into that really another time, I think.
yeah,
But yeah,
uh,
so they're saying there could have been the Vikings. There's a lot of Muslim academics comparing the Viking behaviours and sexual activities to the tribes of Gog and Magog. So obviously they've got a bit of a motivation there. I think I take
hmm
that with a spoonful of salt.
yeah. Always bear in mind who is writing the history.
Yeah. And some
They
people,
do have their own biases.
it's very true. Some people have tried to call them the Scythians, but in this case, it generally just implies that the giant is evil. It's evil and it's a
hmm
servant of Satan. And I think I don't know what they could certainly represent is that state of nature, I guess, which man has to conquer. They could actually be sort of more primordial, even that idea
hmm
of sort of Christian servants of the devil, evil, because they've come and had to overcome this massive challenge, settling a new land. And I think just from looking at what giants have represented in sort of nearby Germanic mythology, the giants are basically the forces of chaos in the Norse mythology, which we know is very, very similar to Anglo-Saxon mythology in a lot of ways.
hmm
So what I don't really know, like, how much of this is from original myths, because, like they say, Geoffrey of Monmouth has just sort of compiled it from a lot of places. But it seems like the giants are pretty old. And there are actually some other accounts of Gog Magog coming back, actually. So he was supposed to have reappeared when William the Conqueror was travelling around Britain, sort of surveying his new domain.
hmm
And when he was travelling the wild hills and the valleys, he came across a very prominent hill that had a ruined town on top of it. Very wide stone walls, and it's obviously been completely empty for a long time, and it's very much ruined. And he's asked a local Briton about it, and the local Briton has said, "Oh yes, that's Castle Bran, but it's now called the Old March." And that in the past, Brutus and his valiant knight Corinius, who Cornwall is named after, and many others who came from the lineage of Trojans, and they inhabited those parts. And there was, the giant called Gog Magog, and he recounts the incident with Crinius. And then he says, so tightly did the giant embrace Crinius that he broke free of his ribs. And in this version, Crinius strikes Gog Magog with his foot, so that he falls down from a great rock into the sea, and there he drowned. But the major difference here is an evil spirit then supposedly entered into the body of Gog Magog and came into these
Yeah.
parts, and long did he defend the country, so that never a Briton dared dwell there. And long after King Bran, the son of Donwall, caused the city to rebuild, and he made good the walls, strengthened the large fosses, and he built the burg and the great march. And the evil spirit came by night and despoiled all that there was therein. And then since then, nobody else has ever dwelt there. And so Pain Peveril actually goes, and he goes up there and says he's going to investigate what's going on. And he's got his cross. And Gog Magog turns up again, but this time he has a club, and he breathes fire, and he breathes fumes, and he's basically a demon giant. And Peveril holds the cross up, and it stops him. And the devil, who the giants worshipped, has possessed him, and he was charged to kill the hated Trojans. And, he's all the giants of Albion have hidden effigies of oxen and cattle, swans, peacocks, and horses, all finely wrought from solid gold that they used to worship at. And his kind of built the town and filled it with evil spirits, and they'd held all sorts of jousts and tournaments, and many people came to watch and become believers, but that none of them left. And he mentioned St. Augustine coming along and causing them trouble because he baptized lots of people. And then Pain asks Gog Magog, well, where's this treasure? Where's these effigies and stuff that you put away? And he says, I will tell you, the treasure of Gog Magog is not meant for you, but is set apart from another. I tell you that you will become lord of this fiefdom, and those who come after you shall keep it with great struggle and war. And from thy default will issue the wolf who will do wonders, who will have sharp teeth, and will be known of all, and will be so strong and fierce that he will drive the wild boar out from the white plain. Such great power he will have. So yeah, this basically supposed to be a huge treasure of the giants, which is falling to someone in the future. And it's not quite clear who exactly that is. But he's been he's been slain, and he bursts into smoke, and it stinks really bad. And William orders his body to be thrown in a pit, but the club is kept. And some people are arguing that the name Gog Magog is a distortion of Gormadoc, or Madoc the Great from Wales. So there's another connection there, but he's resurrected. He's resurrected in another tale after the initial one that he appears in, which is
So
very
he keeps
intriguing.
coming back. So he keeps coming back to life. That is interesting.
It is indeed, because I've never known a giant do that when slain before, so he seems to be some sort of eternal evil spirit type of a figure.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he just represents, right now, really, adversity that just keeps coming back, or corruption that keeps coming back, that a nation does
Yeah.
periodically have to fight.
Yeah, kind of a spirit of the land, perhaps. Some
Yeah,
primordial spirit of a sort.
yeah, that could definitely be it. It's an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're saying devil worship, but yes, they've got effigies and stuff, so it could be that they're sort of how later newcomers, arrivers, characterized the previous Celtic pagan inhabitants of the land. even though Brutus
Mm-hmm.
himself, when he turns up, is still a pagan. He's worshipping Diana. I suppose he is, the more civilized one whose descendants are going to be going on to become Christians, because he does propagate the line which gives rise to Arthur and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But that was basically a myth that I never knew of actually about the whole founding of Britain.
No, I've never heard that one before. But as
Mm,
I've pointed out before, I haven't really heard that much of British
mm,
tales. It's mostly been King Arthur and Robin Hood,
that's true.
but not much outside of that. But that again comes to what's been portrayed in mass media as
Oh,
I've been growing up. So
thank you for the
yeah.
evidence. Thank you for the ice cream. Evidence violates terms of service.
Thank you for the evidence. Uh, does that
Yes.
mean his name is Ice Cream Violet's TOS?
Ice cream violates TOS. Ice cream violates the terms of service.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Thank you for the donation. We really appreciate it.
Yes. Yeah, it's really really good. It's just really nice to just on an emotional level have the support. It's really cool.
Hmm. Uh,
So yeah,
it definitely uh, wants you to keep going with it.
yeah,
So not necessarily in forms of donations, but with people being here.
yeah. It's really
So,
nice to see people turning up,
hmm
and we already see some familiar faces along, like Damn Dowie. Oh yeah, we've seen Flynn before as
mm.
well. Yes.
Hey Flynn, good to see you.
Hello.
Uh,
So yeah,
but didn't Brutus learn quite an intriguing story about Britain?
yes, he did. We've got actually the next one here. There is a sort of prequel to this story because Brutus, in some versions of this, stops to talk to Gog Magog prior to the fight between Gog Magog and Corinius happening. And people think this story is based on a 14th century poem, Descranskians of the Great Giants, which was popular in its time and probably best read allegorically. And we've found this from folklorethursday.com, which is a good blog, and it relates to a queen called Albina and what happened to her and her sisters. So, according to Gog Magog, the story of the origin of the giants of Albion began 3,970 years after the world began. In a country now called Greece, there ruled a very powerful king. This king was very noble and very righteous, and the head of a strict patriarchal state and society. His queen was a very beautiful woman, and they had a very happy marriage, and were blessed with 30 beautiful daughters, who were said to be very tall in some accounts. The giant confessed he did not know all their names, but knew the eldest, tallest, and most influential of these was named Albina. He told Brutus that, in accordance with the custom of the time and of their society, the king decided that their daughters had come of sufficient age to marry. He then decided without consulting his daughters which daughter would marry which of the many kings, princes, and rulers that would be a good political match for his realm. All 30 of the daughters were then married to their allotted husbands with much ceremony and fanfare. However, his daughters were said to be very proud and strong-willed women, who wanted their own well-being and desires met. They were fiercely independent, and hated the idea of being married to men who were not of their own choosing and they did not love. To them it was an indignity and an insult to have to be subjugated in any way to any man, regardless of how rich and powerful he was, whatever benefits it might bring for their father's kingdom. They vowed they would be no man's possession, and would instead be the rulers of all men regardless of their status. To further these vows they plotted together in secret and hatched a most extreme plan. At the same time, and on the same night, they would murder their husbands as they lay in bed next to them asleep and unaware. Gog told Brutus that the plan was agreed by all, except for the very youngest, who loved her husband, but out of fear kept her opposition secret. She did not want him hurt, but she was terrified of her sisters, especially Albina, believing that if she did not take part in the plan or betrayed it to anyone, they would kill her. Nevertheless, she could not bring herself to hurt the man she loved. She said nothing about her feelings to her sisters, but fell into a black depression, not knowing what to do. The company of sisters, having made their plan, and with the date and time, agreed and vowed to carry it out, and returned to their husbands. When the youngest sister returned to her husband, she became ill with worry and fear. She became so upset that her husband, who loved her as much as she loved him, asked her why she appeared so distressed, and asked her directly if it was something that he had done, or had not done, that had so upset her. She broke down in his arms and told him all about the murderous plan. In tears, she confessed that she was meant to kill him, but could not, because she loved him so much. She revealed how her sisters had all sworn to carry out the plan in secret, and had made her swear the same, and told him how terrified she was of them. Her husband clearly loved her dearly, and he knew she loved him, and would never do anything to hurt him. He told her not to say a word to anyone, and he would deal with it himself. The very next day he took her to see her father, and told her to tell him what she had told him. Tearfully she told her father everything, confessing all the horrific details of the plot. Her father was shocked and ashamed that his daughters could think of such a thing, and he was very, very angry. Once he understood the full evil of it, he summoned his other daughters and their husbands to him immediately. He then revealed the plot, to the shock and horror of their husbands, and to the anger and dismay of his other daughters. Naturally, the husbands could not believe their wives would have hatched such a murderous plan. Their wives were now afraid of what their father and husbands would do next, but had no feelings of guilt, only dismay that their plot had been discovered. However, because of their pride, they did not fully see the consequences their plan would bring. Their biggest fear was that they would lose their lavish privileges, but they were to lose much more than that. To make sure he knew exactly what they planned, and they knew his own opinion on the matter, their father interviewed them separately. He told them that their behavior was unacceptable, and subverted the very fabric of state and the society of his realm. He left them in no doubt that he thought they had brought shame on him and shame on themselves. None of his daughters showed any remorse or shame, and it seemed to him that they attempted to find spurious reasons for their behaviour in a vain attempt to defend and to justify it. He saw them as a danger to his realm and a threat to the long-established patriarchal society and family that was the bedrock of his state, and would have condemned them to death. However, as the head of that state and society, he saw himself as a man of justice and law, and he summoned his judges, and a date was set to put them on trial. He exonerated his youngest daughter, and sent her back to live happily with her husband. The day of the trial came, and 29 women were brought before the judges, who heard their case impassively and fairly as the laws of their society required. When all evidence had been given, they came to the judgment that the 29 should be sent into exile without reprieve. For this purpose a ship was made ready and the women forced aboard. They wailed and cried out to mercy, but none was given. The ship was not provided with food, or water, or any piece of equipment or article that would have helped them or given them comfort. There was neither mast, sails, or oars to drive the ship, or rudder to steer it. The ship was towed out into the sea with the women on board to be taken by the wind, water, and currents wherever fate decreed. So it was that these 29 women who could have been great queens instead found themselves cast adrift in the vastness of the sea, with no food or water, powerless, helpless, and bereft of all society but their own. All they could do was put themselves in the hands of the gods and accept whatever fate would bring them. Their thirst and hunger grew with each day, and the seas began to churn. Waves rocked the boat, lapping over the side as the wind drove it further and further from their homeland. The women soon fell sick, and lay in the bottom of the ship wailing and groaning. All the time they were in fear that the ship would be overcome by waves, as a terrible storm caught them and bore them with amazing speed many miles across the sea. Carried by the wings of the storm, the ship at last ran aground on an unknown shore that had no name. The sisters, though shocked and emaciated by hunger and thirst, were unhurt, and debated what should be done. At last, Albina, as the senior, stepped off the ship, and became the first human to set foot on the land, and claimed it for herself. Tentatively, the other sisters followed her lead, for they really had little choice, as they were famished and near to death. On the shore they quickly found cool, clear spring water in abundance, and wild fruits, nuts, and plants that satisfied their hunger, but the sisters yearned for meat. The sisters at this time did not know that the land was uninhabited by humans. They assumed, because of its fertility and the abundance of fruit, nuts, and plants, that there must be humans somewhere that ruled over it. Roaming inland, they found no other people, and rightly believed themselves to be the only humans, but their arrival and presence had been observed. No matter where they roamed, they found no sign of human habitation, which surprised them greatly. They explored the woods and valleys and climbed the hills and mountains, but no trace could they find of other humans. From what they saw, they believed the land could have supported many great civilizations, but none could they find. Nevertheless, although they could see no sign of human life, they were being secretly watched. There came a time when Albina called her sisters to her, and told them that despite the abundance of the land, they had found no other humans. She told them how lucky they were that the storm had brought their ship to this land, where they could at least live out their days without starving. She reminded them that they could never return to their homeland, and she proposed that they face their destiny and make this land their own. Then she proposed that as the eldest and the first of them to set foot on the land, that it be named Albion after herself, and that she should be their leader and their chief. She then asked if any of them had any objections to this. No objections were brought, and she was accepted as their leader and chief among them, and the land was named Albion after her. So they reconciled themselves to their new homeland and fate. They ate the fruits, the nuts, and the plants, and drank from the cool, clear spring waters that abounded. With the passing of time, they discovered the best ways to harvest the good store of the land, and they learnt the seasons that were best for different purposes. Although they did not go hungry, they began to see the movement of birds and animals and fish that were most plentiful throughout the land, and they began to yearn for the taste of meat. When they had been queens, they had gone hunting, as was the custom, and had gained considerable knowledge and skills in the chase. In their homeland, though, they had servants, and dogs, and hawks, and horses, and they had weapons to kill with. In Albion they had none of these things, and to begin with were at a loss what to do. As the lust for meat grew stronger with each passing day, being intelligent and resourceful women, they began to make their own weapons from what was available. They discovered how to shape flints into knives and arrowheads, invented traps to catch the unwary beasts, and soon they were feeding on the blood and meat of the creatures of Albion. They used their flint knives to dress and slice the meat, and cut the skin from their victims, using the hides to make cloves and other items. From the flints they learnt how to make fire and cook their meat, and they drank from the clear bubbling springs of Albion. They grew strong, and could feel vitality running again through their veins, and they began to experience a longing for male companions. But there were none. They were being watched. The sisters had left the world they had already known and entered into a completely unknown world, beyond their experience and knowledge. With no one else to help them, they made the best of what they could, but they did not realize they were not alone. There were beings in Albion they knew nothing of, and had no understanding of. These beings were called incubi, and were not human, but were spirits of darkness. They sensed the feelings of the sisters and fed off their passions and emotions, drawing strength from them, and grew strong, enjoying their torment and always seeking to increase it. Invisible to the women, they waited patiently, biding their time, but always watching. When the women were asleep at night, they would visit them. They appeared as the handsome men in their dreams, but these were no men. They were spirits of the darkness and allied to Satan. They came to them in the night and lay with them. Each one of the sisters had their own demon lover, but they were only aware of them in their dreams and in their feelings. In this way the sisters spawned a race of male giants who were the demon seed of the incubi. The giants spread and dominated Albion long before the arrival of Brutus and the Trojans. Gog Magog told Brutus he was now the last of this race of giants, that were the children and descendants of Albina and her sisters. He told Brutus that his people made the caves and holes in the wild places and the island their homes, and built the great buildings seen ravaged by the wind and rain of countless centuries. He told him that some of his people took to the mountains, thinking they may find security, and they prospered and multiplied and were the lords of Albion and had no peers or rivals. Their pride and arrogance grew, and they wished to dominate all living things, and the earth itself, for they were strong and powerful, and nothing could withstand them in those days. Then he said in sadness, to their shame and ruin, They could not agree between themselves, and the factions formed among them, and they fought against one another. Murder prevailed, and the island of Britain ran red with giants' blood, and still they fought among themselves until only 24 giants remained. Gog-Magog then told Brutus that with his arrival, with his Trojan followers, they could not match the weapons used against them, and had no answer to their numbers. He reflected that with all of his kind dead, he had been captured, and given the choice of being killed there and then or face Corinius in single combat to the death, and he chose the latter. He then informed Brutus that what he had just told him was the origin of the giants of Albion, and how the island had been named. And with the story of Albina and her sisters revealed, all of his questions had been answered. Then he urged him to let the fight with Corinius begin, having no doubt that he would be killed whoever won, and ended his narrative. But yeah, so that is sort of the later, we think, prequel to the Brutus of Troy episode. And it does seem to be highly allegorical. And I think there's some real parallels to actual development of history there, I think. But also a bit more symbolic stuff as well. Do you have any impressions of it, Lynx?
I found the story very interesting. Um, where to start, really? Uh, for one, it's very interesting how the princesses spawned a new race, basically, unknowingly with demons. Um, that one is very curious, um, and that they didn't really know what they were. That they weren't even aware of them. So
Mm.
I definitely start to wonder if they thought there was some immaculate conception going on.
Yes, you do wonder. But that
Mm.
is one of the sort of things that I think is highly symbolic. I think there's a lot there
Yeah,
about the dynamic between uh, men and women and the feminine raw primordial energy and what
yeah,
happens when that has absolutely no rationalizing masculine principle to govern it, and that perhaps
hmm,
in the absence of the rationalizing masculine, the positive masculine, there will be a complete overtaking of chaos without this balance.
yeah. It's also seen from the other side in a way,
Mm,
with their father not consulting them,
that is true.
and yeah, because they weren't necessarily against marriage and potentially good marriages. They were against being married off without being consulted, and
Mm,
that is in many ways the masculine taking maybe a bit too harsh of a control over the women. So
yes.
some women will, in particular those who are headstrong, will resent that and fight against it. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, that both have to be in balance. But also,
Mm,
when the women do as they please, then they may not come up with the best plans, so to speak. Killing their
Yeah,
husbands in their sleeps is somewhat of an overreaction in many ways, I would say.
one could say that certainly. No, Vampire
Yeah.
Frog says we sound like Jungians. And actually, Jung isn't really particularly who I was thinking of when I sort of thought about the masculine and feminine energies. I think it's Evola also who's made points about the balance of these energies. I think he made that in his book about Eros, which is a flipping dense read. It's very dense, but there
Yeah.
is, seen in several ancient cultures a need for balance between a feminine force, which is seen as creative, and a masculine force, which is seen as ordering and rationalizing. No,
Hmm.
I did. I felt like also there seemed to be a sort of component that this idea that is in Indo-European mythology and Hindu mythology of a devolution. They've come from a golden age to committing a sin, being cast out, and essentially regressing to
Hmm.
cavemen and having to relearn all of the skills
Yeah.
of early man. But then Brutus has come back along and in the cycle to reignite a new golden age.
Yeah.
So I felt that sort of cyclical sort of
Hmm.
idea behind it.
Yeah, and also putting an end to the
Mm.
unbalanced history of the island,
Yes.
as the sisters and their progeny were basically out of balance. And with Brutus coming in with the strong masculine principle again, uh, it was time for a new era.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I see in that sort of tale, it sort of shows you the hallmarks of a dying society, or a society that is on a road to nowhere. You
Hmm.
don't have any basis in a strong state with order and rules. You don't have any spiritual purpose, and the basic purpose is just dominating all living things and the earth itself, and concentrating on nothing but power. And then
Hmm.
eventually, a society without any basis like that just sort of splits itself up, starts fighting among itself. It's not based on natural law, it wants to go against nature, but nature doesn't allow that. The universe doesn't allow that. So it's just collapsed in the absence of a sort of concept of Dharma,
Hmm.
or Orlog, or Tao, or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. And I don't know if it's just me, who I like to see that in these things, but I do keep seeing that crop up in these
Yeah.
fairy tales.
Yeah. So do I. And when looking at the sisters, they wanted, so to speak, to eradicate the masculine by killing their husbands. But in the process, they made themselves basically infertile after their banishment and coming to an uninhabited island. So all they had
Mm.
was a demonic force to take advantage of their take advantage of their fertility. Apparently, we sound like pagan witches. Um,
I'm not a witch. Never considered
neither
myself a
am I.
witch.
No.
I
Uh,
mean,
I
pagan,
basically
yes.
I lean towards pagan, personally, but I don't really bring that into much in my everyday life. Um,
The whole witch thing
and
has gotten quite memey. A lot of crystals
yeah,
knocking about.
yeah, and finding your inner goddess and all of that is just basically very unbalanced. I'm more
Hmm.
interested in natural law and dharma and those principles. So, because I do believe there is a natural balance to everything, and we need to restore that.
Well, says, as I agree, says, right now, that it does seem that the feminine is very dominant. You need to be thinking about restoring a bit more balance to the world. Dharma is paganism. I mean, yes, you can consider Hinduism a form of paganism. It's very similar. A lot of the Indo European native religions have gods which could sort of map onto the Hindu pantheon.
Hmm.
There's definitely very much a commonality across the sort of European territories that we have very similar gods and
Yeah,
goddesses. It's just a matter of how you address them in your own region, in what way is appropriate for the land
yeah,
that you're in.
the Bible, yeah, and the Bible also contains a lot of natural law, in particular the
Mm,
New Testament. So,
it does indeed.
yeah, it's not bound to one sort of religion or another. It crops up
No,
basically everywhere.
because it does
Um,
just apply to everyone.
hmm As for the feminine being dominant right now, yes and no. On the surface, it seems like it, but it's the dark side of the feminine. It's inverted,
Mm,
and you definitely see many women more or less LARPing as men in many ways, trying to act like men. And since they're being women, they can't really do that properly, of course. And the masculine has been weakened. So I think we both have to work on ourselves and find back to where we're supposed to be
mm.
and our more appropriate roles. Now, how that will end up in a modern society, I honestly don't know because we don't live in a world like our ancestors did. So uh, I don't think it's right to go completely back to an agricultural society, but I
No, I
think we
don't
will
reckon
find
that
a
would
way.
work.
No, we will find a way. So, but that road is yet to be made. So we have to find that way.
Yeah. Well, exactly, Fearless Bear. It is. Nothing is good in excess. You can't really expect your world to be all order, and it certainly can't be all chaos.
No,
Yeah, modern witches are more like spiteful mutants. Dotton. We love Dotton. I love Dotton anyway. He's great.
yeah,
I do
yeah,
like him.
yeah. It does have that uh, charm of somewhat of a mad scientist in many ways.
Blob
At
says
least a
try me.
very
Blob says try me.
uh,
It's Blob a witch? I mean, I,
hmm,
I sort of didn't go into the whole scene myself because it did seem very much infested by memery, but I suppose you do get practical sort of believing pagans who call themselves witches as well.
Yeah, many of them are very influenced by uh, that so-called New Age. Um, and the little I have looked into it's really just unhinged in many ways. Um, Basically, just latching on to a principle and carrying it too far. So um, it doesn't really do what they think it does or they want it to do. It's at least with women, it's basically just feminism LARPing as witches, you could say.
New Age music doesn't have enough Iron Maiden in it. It's quite a lot of there is quite a lot of pagan metal. Oh,
Yeah,
Boudicca's
there is.
finished baking pies. Finishing baking pies. Ooh,
Yeah,
yummy.
yeah, sounds good. I'm going to
Yeah,
make a pie within the next days.
that's cool. What sort of pie?
hmm with veal.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a good size one that I roasted uh,
Mm,
a week or two back. So some of that will go into a pie.
that's gonna be good. Apparently, those
Yeah,
sisters in the story would be jealous of you. They were
yeah,
really yearning for meat.
yeah. Well, I do have
Do
Nordic
you think
privilege,
that's
so
symbolic too? I feel like that's
uh,
symbolic.
yeah, it does certainly sound like it. Um, I don't really know why, but it takes my mind actually to cannibalism. Maybe because
Hmm.
they spawned a race of giants who were cannibals and
Yeah.
eating human flesh. So it might be just a bias of my mind, but
Hmm. No,
uh,
I hadn't actually thought about that. That's true.
yeah. Uh, well, my mind works in mysterious ways sometimes.
Mm. But we got one more story tonight,
Yeah, we do. Uh,
and that's
acco-
certainly got the most giants. It gets in the most of
yeah,
them. Gets in quite a
yeah.
lot, in fact.
Yeah, according to this, it didn't seem like all of the giants were killed off earlier, because this is the history of Jack, the giant killer. In
Yeah.
the reign of the famous King Arthur, there lived in Cornwall a lad named Jack, who was a boy of bold temper and took a delight in hearing or reading of conjurers, giants, and fairies, and used to listen eagerly to the deeds of the knights of King Arthur's round table. In those days there lived on St. Michael's Mount of Cornwall a giant named Cormoran, 18 feet high and 9 feet round. His fierce and savage looks were the terror of all who beheld him. He dwelt in a gloomy cavern on the top of the mountain and used to wade over to the mainland in search of prey, when he would throw half a dozen oxen upon his back and tie 3 times as many sheep and hogs around his waist, and march back to his own abode. The giant had done this for many years when Jack resolved to destroy him. Jack took a horn, a shovel, a pickaxe, his armor, and a black lantern, and one winter's evening he went to the mount. There he dug a pit of 22 feet deep and 20 broad. He covered the top so as to make it look like solid ground. He then blew his horn so loudly that the giant awoke and came out of his den, crying out, "You saucy villain, you shall pay for this. I'll broil you for my breakfast." He had just finished when, taking one step further, he tumbled headlong into the pit and Jack struck him a blow on the head with his pickaxe, which killed him. Jack then returned home to cheer his friends with the news. Another giant, called Blunderbore, vowed to be revenged on Jack if he ever came across him. This giant kept an enchanted castle in the midst of a lonely wood, and sometime after the death of Cormoran, Jack was passing through a wood, and being weary, sat down and went to sleep. The giant, passing by and seeing Jack, carried him to his castle, where he locked him up in a large room, the floor of which was covered with bodies, skulls, and bones of men and women. Soon after, the giant went to fetch his brother, who was likewise a giant, to make a meal of his flesh. And Jack saw with terror up through the bars of his prison the two giants approaching. Jack, perceiving in one corner of the room a strong cord, took courage, and making a slip knot at each end, he threw them around his head and tied it to the window bars. He then pulled till it had choked them. When they were black in the face, he slid down the rope and stabbed them to the heart. Jack next took a great bunch of keys from the pocket of Blunderbore and went into the castle again. He made a strict search through all the rooms, and in one of them he found three ladies tied up by the hair of their heads and almost starved to death. They told him that their husbands had been killed by the giants, who had then condemned them to starve to death because they would not eat the flesh of their own dead husbands. Ladies, said Jack, I have put an end to the monster and his wicked brother, and I give you this castle and all the riches it contains to make some amends for the dreadful pains you have felt. He then very politely gave the keys of the castle and went further on his way to Wales. As Jack had but a little money, he went on as fast as possible. At length he came to a handsome house. Jack knocked on the door, when there forth came a Welsh giant. Jack said he was a traveller who had lost his way, on which the giant made him welcome, and let him into a room where there was a good bed to sleep in. Jack took off his clothes quickly, but though he was weary, he could not go to sleep. Soon after, he heard the giant walking backward and forward in the next room, saying to himself, though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains out quite. Say you so? Thought Jack. Are these your tricks upon travellers? But I do hope to prove as cunning as you are. Then, getting out of bed, he groped around the room and at last found a large thick billet of wood. He laid it in its place in the bed and then hid himself in a dark corner of the room. The giant, around midnight, entered the apartment, and with his bludgeon struck many blows on the bed, in the very place where Jack had laid the log, and then he went back to his room, thinking he had broken all of Jack's bones. Early in the morning, Jack put on a bold face on the matter, and walked into the giant's room to thank him for his lodging. The giant stared at him when he saw him, and began to stammer out, "Oh, dear me, is it you? Pray, how did you sleep last night? Did you hear or see anything in the dead of the night?" "Nothing to speak of," said Jack carelessly. "A rat, I believe, gave me 3 or 4 slaps with its tail and disturbed me a little, but I soon went to sleep again." The giant wondered more and more at this, yet he did not answer a word, but went to bring 2 great bowls of hasty pudding for the breakfast. Jack wanted to make the giant believe he could eat as much as himself, so he contrived to button a leathern bag inside his coat, and slip the hasty pudding into this bag, while he seemed to be putting it into his mouth. When breakfast was over, he said to the giant, "Now I will show you a fine trick. I can cure all wounds with a touch. I could cut off my head in 1 minute, and the next put it sound again on my shoulders. You shall see an example." He then took hold of the knife, ripped up the leathern bag, and all the hasty pudding tumbled out on the floor. Odds but her nails, cried the Welsh giant, who was ashamed to be outdone by such a little fellow as Jack. Her how can do that herself? So he snatched up the knife, plunged it into his own stomach, and in a moment dropped down dead. Jack, having hitherto been successful in all his undertakings, resolved not to be idle in the future. He therefore furnished himself with a horse, a cap of knowledge, a sword of sharpness, shoes of swiftness, and an invisible coat, the better to perform the wonderful enterprises that lay before him. He travelled over high hills, and on the third day he came to a large and spacious forest through which his road lay. Scarcely had he entered the forest when he came upon a monstrous giant dragging along by the hair of their heads a handsome knight and his lady. Jack alighted from his horse, and tying him in to an oak tree, put on his invisible cloak, under which he carried his sword of sharpness. When he came up to the giant, he made several strokes at him, but he could not reach his body, but wounded his thighs in several places. And at length, putting down both hands to his sword, and aiming with all his might, he cut off both his legs. Then Jack, setting his foot upon his neck, plunged his sword into the giant's body, when the monster gave a groan and expired. The knight and his lady thanked Jack for their deliverance, and invited him to their house to receive a proper reward for his services. No, said Jack, I cannot be easy till I found out this monster's habitation. So taking the knight's directions, he mounted his horse and soon after came in sight of another giant, who was sitting on a block of timber waiting for his brother's return. Jack alighted from his horse and putting on his invisible coat, approached and aimed a blow at the giant's head, but missing his aim, he only cut off his nose. On this the giant seized his club and laid about him most unmercifully. Nay, said Jack, if this be the case, I'd better dispatch you. So jumping up upon the block, he stabbed him in the back, and when he dropped down dead, Jack then proceeded on his journey and travelled over hills and dales, till arriving at the foot of a high mountain, he knocked at the door of a lonely house when an old man let him in. When Jack was seated, the hermit thus addressed him: My son, on the top of this mountain, an enchanted castle, kept by the giant Galligantes and a vile magician. I lament the fate of the duke's daughter, whom they seized as she was walking in her father's garden, and brought hither transformed into a deer. Jack promised that in the morning, at the risk of his life, he would break the enchantment, and after a sound sleep he rose early, put on his invisible coat, and got ready for the attempt. When he had climbed to the top of the mountain, he saw two fiery griffins, but he passed between them without the least fear of danger, for he could not see him because of his invisible coat. On the castle gate he found a golden trumpet, under which were written these lines: Whoever can this trumpet blow shall cause the giant's overthrow. As soon as Jack had read this, he seized the trumpet and blew a shrill blast, which made the gates fly open and the very castle itself tremble. The giant and the conjurer now knew that their wicked course was at an end, and that they stood biting their thumbs and shaking with fear. Jack, with his sword of sharpness, soon killed the giant, and the magician was then carried away in a whirlwind, and every knight and beautiful lady who had been shaped into birds and beasts returned to their proper shapes. The castle vanished away like smoke, and the head of the giant Galligantus was sent to King Arthur. The knights and ladies rested that night at the old man's hermitage, and the next day set out for the court. Jack then went up to the king and gave his majesty an account of all his fierce battles. Jack's fame had now spread throughout the whole country, and at the king's desire, the duke gave him his daughter in marriage, to the joy of all his kingdom. After this, the king gave him a large estate, on which he and his lady lived the rest of the days in joy and contentment. So there we have the story of Jack the Giant Killer. And
Yes.
as you heard, there definitely were more giants in the land.
Hmm. There's a lot of giants. He gets through quite a few.
Yeah, and that was the short version of the story. There is a longer one
Yes.
as
There
well.
is there is a version which takes 22 minutes to read, which
Yeah,
we thought in the interests of everybody getting to bed on time that we'd not do,
yeah,
because there is only so much time you have on your Sunday evening.
yeah. And let's see, White Rabbit Radio is hosting us. So
Yes.
that is very good of you, Tim. As always, we appreciate your hosting.
Mhm. Really
Hmm.
great.
Yeah,
Like we have who are our lovely hosts. We have White Rabbit hosting, and
we have
Boudica
Boudica.
is hosting us too.
Uh, yeah, and Meme Man 1984 is also hosting us and just followed. So we really appreciate it. So good to
Yes.
see you all here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's really nice. We do have a lovely community of people
yeah, we definitely
who
do.
watch these. It's only 1600 here, nowhere near bedtime for me. It's a bit closer to bedtime for both me and Lynx.
Yeah, it's past 10:30 here, so
Yes.
it is on the evening for us when we start these
Yep.
streams, but over in the US, of course, it's still in the afternoon or even morning, I suppose.
Yeah. We would carry on longer if we could, American viewers, but yes, for us it's definitely bedtime. Not far off now.
Yeah,
But yeah.
well, I do tend to be a bit of a night owl, so
Yeah, Lynx is practically nocturnal. I'm not so much.
yeah,
I guess
yeah,
that's
but
what are lynxes actually that active during the night or the day?
they are cats, so they do both, I
Mm,
think.
yeah.
Um, but I do like the night because they are very shy. There are actually lynxes not that far from where I live, but I'd never seen them. I didn't even know them until it was mentioned they were captured on a wilderness camera.
Mm,
So they are rarely
yes.
seen.
So, in terms of this story, Jack is quite clever about how he kills giants, really, isn't he? He doesn't go at
Hmm.
it in the conventional manners, and he manages to dig a pit 22 feet deep and 20-foot wide.
Yeah, and cover it afterwards.
Mm.
So
Now,
quite a strong man there.
yes, we were saying that in the longer version of this story, it is somewhat implied that Jack is a half giant by
Yeah,
saying because it says that he has an uncle who is a giant. Now, there's two explanations for that. So, um, Jack's father or mother's human sibling has married a giant, or that one of Jack's parents is a giant, which would explain why he's he could perhaps be bigger than the average human and find it so easy to dig a pit that was 22 foot deep. And of
hmm,
course, we know about half giants fighting giants. When the possibility arose that he maybe could be half giant, I did think of Thor, actually,
Yeah.
who sort of chose the more orderly side of his own heritage over the chaos
Mm-hmm.
that giants represent.
Yeah.
So it could be one of the Jack is one of these people who is somewhat like a giant, but has chosen to use his abilities for good.
Yeah. Or that can come from his father,
Hmm, could indeed.
or the parent who had a giant as a sibling. That they chose a normal life, so to speak, and
Yeah.
then raised their sons on stories, um, and in that way intrigue them, but also form this mind in wanting to fight for good in society.
Thank you for the diamond, 1690 Sparky. Enjoyed the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. We'll be back again. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. That's
yeah,
very good. It's very kind of you to say. Very kind of you to donate a diamond.
yeah, and we will definitely be happy to see you back again.
Indeed. Well,
Yeah.
we're happy to see just anyone around him and back again. It's really cool
Mm-hmm.
to have people
Yeah,
who we can see and go, ah, I know them. They watched last week.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
really cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
And he certainly has to use his brains
he does.
for defeating the trolls. And as we said last week when we covered trolls in Scandinavian lore, it's the same principle because the giants are so huge and strong
Mm,
that in order to defeat them, you, for the most part, have to use your brains and outsmart them.
yes.
Of course, unless you come from Troy, of course, as we heard earlier tonight, then you
Mm,
might actually be able to wrestle with them. But the later descendants didn't, so they had to use their wits to get around them.
indeed.
And and we also have the theme of a farmer's son who performs many great deeds and even outperforms knight.
Yes.
That is quite a theme we see around.
Hmm. I was
So,
wondering if this particular story would fit into the boy who steals ogre's treasure trope at all, because that is very much a very old Indo European trope. And I noticed in the longer version that actually they were borrowing some lines from Jack and the Beanstalk,
mm-hmm,
which genuinely does fit that trope textbook. He does steal the second. Is this the second giant? Yep, it's the second giant blunderbore that he does steal the riches.
mm-hmm.
He steals. I think he picks up from that giant his various magical items, if I get the correct
uh, that
impression.
that was from his uncle.
Oh yes, that's from his uncle. I get
Yeah, and
there's
he
so many
also
giants
gives.
in this story.
Yeah. In the longer version, Jack helps out Arthur's son,
Yes.
including giving him of his uncle's treasure because the prince is penniless.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing that and sending the prince on his way, he then, uh, because he had fooled his uncle into thinking the prince was going to kill him, as a reward, he collects his magical items of invisible coat and sword of
Yes.
sharpness and shoes of swiftness, and that
Mm. But in
cap of
this
knowledge.
In this shorter version, they come after the Welsh giant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, but it doesn't really say that that giant had him, so
Mm,
it's a bit imprecise at times.
it is. I think I looked
Yeah.
up both of these, and the one by Andrew Lang and the longer one is that we're reading right now. Andrew Lang's the one we're reading right now, and there's a longer one by Joseph someone, can't remember his last name. But they were both written down in about 1860 to 1890.
Mm-hmm.
These versions,
Yeah.
so they've probably been through quite a bit of change already.
Yeah. Yeah, or it's they are collected from different parts, perhaps,
Mm.
and then put together. That is another possibility.
I feel like there's been possibly several stories just sort of mashed together.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's maybe a thing
Yeah.
that has happened here.
Yeah, the Jack might not be one man. He might be several men, several Jacks, or
It certainly seems
by
like it
different
could
things.
be.
Yeah. In the longer version, I only had time to give it somewhat of a skim, but I did
Mm.
see themes that I've seen in Norwegian stories as well. So it does cover many, many topics and themes that we see all around the place, basically.
Yes, certainly.
Uh, yeah, and I definitely was intrigued by it being placed in the time of Arthur.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff which has been linked to him, and I think the time when Arthur's supposed to be happening is the time that one would otherwise call the Dark Ages.
Hmm.
So it's sort of kind of like filling that gap
Yeah,
in the historical
um,
accounts.
yeah. I can't remember. I saw a theory. This is years ago. But I saw a video on someone trying to date the story of Arthur, but I don't remember what time it concluded that it was most probable to have happened.
Hmm. That is
But
something we could maybe look for. And if I
yeah,
do find any information on that in the next week, be certain to tweet it out on half Europa Twitter. So that would be
yeah, and put it out
extremely.
on our
And I'll put it on the channel as well. That would be
yeah.
extremely interesting to find out about. But then what else do we have in here? We have being worthy of using a particular instrument. He is worthy
Mm-hmm.
of blowing the horn.
Yeah, and being fearless
Mm-hmm.
or conquering your own fear, because there are times when he does fear for his life, but he overcomes it and isn't paralyzed by it. He doesn't give up. Uh,
That is true.
yeah, and he is always acting very selflessly with the three ladies that are tied up by their hair because they wouldn't eat the flesh of their husbands, which was quite a little gruesome detail there. Um, he doesn't even take money for his own journey for the services, but he
That
gives
is true.
everything to the ladies. So, and it's definitely a bit of an odd feature to kill someone's husband and then
Make them
demand them
make them
to
eat him.
eat them. Yeah,
Which I guess again just puts giants as just the embodiment of evil and chaos. They
hmm,
seem to go around here, turning people into animals, having magical powers. They Some of them do have magical powers. because the
Yeah.
sorcerer is a giant as well, Galagantus.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also, some of them seem to be, again, really dumb, because, of course, the Welsh one falls for the hasty pudding trick,
Mm-hmm.
just like in the leather bag.
Yeah, that's basically identical to a troll story we have in Norway of the
Yes.
Ash Lad. He's also called the Cinder Lad some places. Uh, but he managed to enlist the help of a troll in cutting down some timber instead of the giant killing him. I'm sorry, the troll. And he's then invited home to the troll to eat dinner. And they are having porridge, and the ash lad basically does the same trick by having his knapsack on his stomach and cutting that open and fooling the troll into doing the same and obviously killing himself. So uh,
Yeah,
I
and we
was
did we did read that one out actually. I think that was that in our episode on trolls, or was that
no, I
before?
did. I haven't read that one. I think I've only told you about the story.
Ah, okay.
Uh,
We should read that one some point.
yeah, yeah, we should. I want to read them all actually.
Yes, there's so many, and I keep finding books of folk tales in local sort of second-hand bookstores, and I want to
Yeah,
buy them all, but I can't buy them all.
yeah, I know the feeling. I haven't been able to look. We don't
Yeah.
have any secondhand stores where I live, so I have to go into the city,
Mm.
and I haven't been there for a while. Uh, and welcome, Canadian. It's good to see you here.
Hey. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
Couldn't see what
Uh,
Canadian was for a second. Was like a Canadian kid?
oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, I agree. I love the idea of Jack wandering around the land of giants, spamming keys.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it did seem like he kept to Cornwall and Wales. So apparently, that's where the giants still were,
Cornwall,
or maybe they.
Cornwall and Wales are kind of far from each other. Wales is sort of slap bang in the middle of the British Isles, and then
Okay,
Cornwall's all over, like, it's in the southeast.
I'm just displaying my ignorance then.
But yeah, he seems to have just gone between the two and not had much of a run in between.
Mm-hmm.
And hello,
Uh,
no, it's not Boudica, it's Katrina. Boudica's hosting us at the moment, which is lovely.
yeah.
Um, I don't actually have my name's not matching any sort of username that I've got, but I'm I'm half Europa. It's southwest. Yeah, I'm not that good at directions, Matt. I get 'em
Thank
mixed
you.
up.
Thank you for clearing it out. Uh, but I guess it's an open question then if the giants are roaming all the way between Cornwall and Wales, or if it's just those two regions.
I feel like they probably stay in that bit. I feel like they got a habitat.
Mm-hmm. They do seem to live in the more secluded areas, so I guess the habitation of the land will play a part.
Yeah, my channel does have an unfortunate acronym actually, now you do mention it, Canadian. Yeah, it's quite unfortunate. But, you know, this is a nice, wholesome stream. We don't do that sort of thing here.
No,
Oh,
we sit around the fireplace and telling stories, and
yes. And have a hot chalky milk here. That's what we do.
yeah, yeah.
My screen is getting I have zoomed in on my screen.
Ah,
I don't know how I managed
that's
to do that.
convenient.
I'm back now.
Well, that's good. Everything is back in proportion.
Yes. No, I think that is all the stories we do have for tonight, folks.
Yeah,
We
I
decided
can't.
we decided on those ones because they seemed to be the most historical stories that Britain had about giants actually.
Yeah, your stories, of course, seemed obvious because they are so tied to the founding of Britain.
Mm,
Uh, and for my part, I thought Jack was sort of a natural progression with that because it's tied to King Arthur, which was of the line of Brutus. So
yes.
it fit quite nicely in a time scale, so to speak.
Mm. It's not something I'd ever heard mentioned, and I wondered what Brutus of Troy was about, and what the hell anyone so sort of Roman sounding would have to do with Britain. But it seems like in at least in the vicinity of a few tribes in the southwest that it might actually have a bit of truth to it. We don't know. But yeah.
We have a question there if the Grimm tales
Oh
are
yeah.
fairly. Oh, yeah, they are
Mm.
very old.
Yes.
Uh, they There have been research done on European folk tales, and I think if I remember correctly, the conclusion was that about 25% of them can be traced back at least 5,000 years.
Mm.
The themes go across all of Europe, but with their own local flavors, so to speak. Um, but you can clearly see that the tales have a similar root and a very similar structure, but it's just the details that are varying a bit. We could
Yes.
possibly do a stream on that one day.
We could
Com-
do a stream on the archetypes, yeah,
mm-hmm.
and I'll
And
see if I've got
comparing.
anyone who can access that index to any sort of academic system who I know might be able to access it.
Ah, that would be great.
Because it would be great to actually be able to have a look at that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this evening of a few tales and discussions around them. Uh, Hopefully, it has intrigued you to look into some stuff or given inspiration of what you want to tell your own children. Uh,
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people who are out there, like, collecting this stuff and sort of writing down these folk tales. There's a lot out there, and no matter how long we do this stream, I think we can certainly only ever bring you a taste, and we hope we put you onto more folk tales and, you know, different myths and cultures. And there's certainly a lot of fun to be had with comparing the folk tales across Europe.
yeah,
which is really cool. You do see some real similarities and some unique spins on really old archetypes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
uh, there's definitely a variety across the land. So
Yes.
it's really interesting to look into that.
Yeah, it is. The
Yeah,
revolutionary phenotype. I don't quite know what that is. It sounds like something
oh,
Dalton
that
would discuss.
I think that is the French guy.
Oh,
Uh, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. JF. I think
oh.
he wrote a book called The Revolutionary Phenotype.
I need to look up
I
what
don't
that
really
is.
follow. I don't really follow him,
GFJ.
so yeah,
GFG. JFG. Getting the
yeah.
G's and J's the wrong way around.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, so I'll just call him
Yeah.
JF.
Jean Francisque or something.
Yeah, he's a French Canadian, so
Yeah.
his name is French, and I won't even try that.
Gary Epi. No. Maybe. Who knows? But none eight people. We hope you've enjoyed the stream.
Yeah, and hope to see you again the same time next week.
Yes. Same time next week.
Yeah.
I think we are doing goblins.
Uh, Let me check. Dragons is
Oh,
next week.
dragons. Yes, I got mixed
Mm-hmm.
up when we were doing them. So
Yeah.
dragons next week.
And then we have stepmothers and princesses the week after that. And the next one is devils and smiths. And
That's
then
another
we have
very
the
old
sea.
archetype.
Yeah.
Yes.
So as you can hear, we do have our season planned out. So hope to see you the following Sundays.
Well, see everyone.
Good night.
Yes. Yay, hail Scotland indeed. And Norway. And England. Good night, everyone.